Here's an interesting tidbit for your service IQ. Most vehicles on the road that have variable valve timing do not have a sensor that reads the oil pressure directly. Instead, they have a switch that senses oil pressure in the engine either between 3 and 10 psi. So this rules out the possibility of using a scan tool to check the oil pressure. On the data PID for the oil pressure, it'll be the oil pressure switch, and it will say either on or off or yes or no. This is where you need to use a gauge to measure the oil pressure at one of the galleys on the top end of the motor. Using an oil pressure gauge connected to one of the galleys, you need to make sure the oil pressure reaches a certain level for a certain RPM range. This is typically issued in the service information. You could have one for idle and then one for 3,000 RPMs. This can vary on the make of the vehicle, and it could change up. You could have a V6 that requires 70 psi, or a 4-cylinder will only require 40 psi. And it could be the other way around. This changes due to the make, model, type of oil pump you're dealing with, and then also the features on the engine that use the oil pressure, like variable valve timing. If the variable valve timing system, in other words, the oil control solenoid and the actuator, are not getting enough oil pressure, chances are the camshaft will either go into the full advance or the full retard position, depending on if it's an exhaust or intake valve. This will generate a code. The reason why low oil pressure is bad for a variable valve timing system, it's because that actuator, it fights the friction between the camshaft and also the valves on the engine. So if it doesn't have the pressure inside to move the vanes, it will force the camshaft in one position. This is a stuck camshaft and the source of your code. The most likely cause for low oil pressure in the variable valve timing system, well, it's going to come down to the oil flow. Typically, there is a strainer or even a screen on the oil control valve solenoid. This is typically large pieces of either gasket material, carbon deposit chunks, and it has clogged up that filter, and pressure can no longer make it to the solenoid or even the actuator. You can clean these screens or strainers, but typically you're better off replacing them. Also, here's another tidbit. If you're encountering one of these problems in the field, make sure you're looking at the oil filter and also the oil in the crankcase. These are critical because if the right oil is not there, well, it can't generate the same oil pressure. Also, if a filter is blocked, that's going to change your oil pressure too. I'm Andrew Markell. Thank you very much.